Hello and welcome to the garden. Well, like a lot of gardeners, this is the time of year for this fella, the potato. And I've got some here that have been chitting for a little while. They've got quite nice shoots coming, and I'm going to be planting those today in some pots. So I've got some 35 litre pots, I've got some 25 litre pots, and if I've got any tubers left, I've got some 15 litre pots too. So this is nothing new. There are lots of videos out there. I've even done quite a few myself about planting potatoes in pots. There's just one interesting little thing about these, especially if you're using a small pot. You put one tuber, two at the most, down the bottom, and that's that. But if you're using a big old pot like the 35 litre pots, depending what sort of tuber you're putting in, you will want to do that either down the bottom or then in two layers. And that is because potatoes, well, there are two sorts. They're sometimes referred to as determinate or indeterminate, a term that is perhaps more familiar from the tomatoes, but essentially it has the same meaning with potatoes too. So the determinate sort, they essentially produce their potatoes in one layer, and if you've got a deeper pot and you just put one tuber in, you're not going to fill that with potatoes. So if it's that kind of variety, you want to plant those at two levels in a pot this size. So you put two down the bottom, halfway up you put another two, probably the other orientation, that would be sensible. And then maybe, if you're lucky, you get that filled with new potatoes. The indeterminate types, well, they keep on going and they will potentially produce tubers all the way up. And so you only need to put those down at the bottom. So generally speaking, if it's a main crop variety, you only need to plant down the bottom and it will produce all the way up the stem there. And if it's one of the early sorts, those are the ones that you probably want to put in several layers. It's no good having this huge, great big container and sticking a first early tuber down the bottom and expecting to have a great harvest, because you won't get it. The plants just don't grow long enough. If you look into this a little bit, you'll find other terms bandied around. One is Haulm longevity. So that is to do with how long the top growth keeps going, how long the plant keeps growing after the first flowers start to appear. Or not every variety puts on flowers, of course, but assuming they do, as soon as it starts to reproduce, the tubers start to swell, the flowers appear. How long does the plant keep going for? And the first earlies, obviously they're done in one flush. So that top growth, they start to put on the flowers. You know at that point the tubers are forming, and they are quite soon over and done with, whereas the main crop varieties will keep on growing for quite some weeks after that point. So Haulm longevity is another term that's used. You will often find information on this in a sort of geared really towards farmers, because the type of potato that you're growing, that affects the amount of feed that they need, and the nitrogen requirements for, as I understand it, a determinate variety are actually higher than for an indeterminate variety. So farmers want to know how much stuff to spread on their fields. The type of potato makes a difference there. So there are lots of tables of information available from sources that cater to farmers rather than home gardeners. The only thing that we're really interested in as amateurs is how many of these things do I stick in the pot? So it's not that hard at two ends of the spectrum, the really early ones and the late season sorts. Where it can get a little bit doubtful is in the middle. Some of the second earlies. Now some of those, they're almost the same as the first earlies. They grow fairly quick. They're just a little bit slower. Whereas others, they go on a lot longer, and there are quite a few that are sitting in the middle there. Well, it's a second early or it's an early main crop, and so on. So you do have to be careful with those. And I've got two that are in that middle ground. These are partially determinate, which is a little bit annoying because you're then scratching your head wondering what to do with them. So this year I've already got the first earlies underway. They're in the greenhouses in 15 litre pots. I planted those much earlier in the year, and I'm hoping to get our first tubers from those at the end of April. So I'm not actually sowing more first earlies today. I've got two second earlies and a main crop. So one of those is Charlotte and the other second early is Wilja. Now both of those are in this partially determinate zone. I think I'm going to treat these pretty much the same way as the main crop, so I'm not going to layer these tubers. I will put some of the Charlottes in the smaller pots, that makes sense, and whatever I've got left over I will put in some of the bigger ones, but I'm not going to do it in multiple layers for those. The Wilja, that grows on for quite a long time actually, so I'm going to treat that just like a main crop, and I think that's perfectly all right to do that. It will, those Haulms will keep on going. The tubers bulk up pretty quickly, and I'm hoping that I'll get a reasonable depth of tubers there. But yeah, there is this weird grey area that is worth bearing in mind, and occasionally you get a surprise, particularly with some of the modern varieties. So there are one or two that you would think were really long-lasting varieties. They produce big old potatoes. You might find them in the supermarket in large sizes, sometimes used for bakers even, and when you look them up you find that they're actually a short Haulm variety. So it is worth just checking that and basing your decision on how many tubers to plant around the Haulm longevity. It's a slightly odd topic, I know. It's very rarely mentioned for these, and very often if it is mentioned it's sort of broken down into two quite distinct groups. There's the first earlies, you have to plant those in layers, and there's the main crops. The second earlies, they can go either way, so it is worth maybe checking those and figuring out the best thing to do. So the varieties I'm growing today, I've already mentioned the second earlies. Charlotte was a replacement for International Kidney, which wasn't available this season. The Wilja we haven't grown for a few years. They're both, for me, they're both a little bit modern, but they are both excellent potatoes. Wilja, I think it was raised in the 60s, but introduced in the 70s, and it's one of those potatoes that is a fantastic all-rounder. It's great for boiling, it's great for roasting, it stores well, it makes a good mash. It does everything pretty well. It is a great potato. It's reliable. Because it's in that sort of second early main crop bracket, it bulks up very early, so compared with some of the main crop varieties, and that's really handy if we get bothered by blight again. By the time the blight appears, hopefully those tubers will have started to bulk up already, and they store well. In our experience, they store pretty much as well as any main crop variety, so that it really doesn't have any drawbacks. I suppose for any specific purpose, if you want a potato that's brilliant for boiling, that won't be it. If you want one that's perfect for mash or perfect for roasting, there will be better potatoes out there for all those purposes. But this is one variety that does really well for just about everything. So we're really going to treat that one as part of our main crop. Our other main crop potato is an old favourite. It's Belle de Fontenay. That produces lovely waxy textured potatoes, and those two together mean that we've got all of our main uses nicely covered there. So those are the three that we're going to set out right now. All I need to do is count up the number of tubers we've got and decide which pots are getting which. The tubers are a bit scrappy this year. Some of them are really small. We've got some whoppers. I'm not that impressed with the tubers. I don't think they were in great shape, but most of them have chitted up okay, and I'm sure they will get going and give us a reasonable harvest, depending on the weather and blight and all of those other factors, but hopefully we get some nice potatoes. So as usual, we've got a mixture here of old potting soil. This is a blend of various things, sort of peat-free, multi-purpose, and some locally produced organic compost that we used last year. So this has grown potatoes and other things before. There's absolutely no problem reusing this. I had a question on an old video recently about whether you could reuse potting compost that where the potatoes had blight, and there are one or two things where you don't want to reuse it. So if you've had, I think, things like blackleg or stuff that is potentially soil borne, and you can pass it on the next year, but blight is not one of those. Blight requires living tissue to survive, and you can quite happily reuse compost from blighted potatoes. I'm adding to that some horse compost as usual and a bit of fish blood and bone. So once I've mixed this up, this will be a lovely viable potting medium for these potatoes once again. Oh, one of last year's residents. We have just been unearthing the last of our, I think these were some small Charlottes from last year. And another. I don't want to leave those in there. They'll start to grow. Oh, I did not do a good job here. Right, that will do. This is a little on the dry side. We will give this a good soaking. Of course, this soil has been stored in bins and various things through the winter, so it is pretty dry. I do like to add back some fresh compost of some sort, whether it's homemade compost or, in this case, some more horse compost, rather than just adding the feed to it. It's good, I think, to restore the organic matter there, but that'll be great for these new potatoes. So I'm going to start with these smaller tubs, and I've picked out 5 good sized tubers here for these 15 litre tubs. I don't normally put second earlies in these. They're great for first earlies. 1 tuber per pot is then plenty, but I've picked 5 of these out which have got some nice chits on them. They've all got at least 3, so that's fine. I'm just going to set that down near the bottom of the pot and top these right up. Now, if you're in a hurry to get these started, you can just sort of partially fill the pots and come along and top them up later. That's perfectly all right. today I'm hoping to fill them all to the top. I'll leave an inch or two for watering, but it'd be good if we can get them all done today. Right. So I've done 5 of the 15 litre pots, I've done 5 of the 25 litre pots, and I put 2 tubers in each of those, only the one in the 15 litre pots. Now of course the question of how many tubers do you put in these 35, 30 litre pots, this is a common size for growing potatoes in pots. Actually it's a bit of a red herring, because really it's not the number of tubers that's important, it's the number of stems that are produced. So if you've got tubers like this, I've got 3 chits on that. That's absolutely fine. That's not going to be overcrowded at all. If you want big potatoes, you want fewer stems. If you don't mind about the size of them, or you want smaller potatoes, then more stems is beneficial. You can control the number of stems in 2 ways, of course. One, by varying the number of tubers you put in, and the other by rubbing off excess chits on the tubers, if that's what you want to do. So these sorts of pots, anything from 2 to 4 tubers is suitable in here, and it depends on how many chits they've got and the size of potatoes you're looking for. Now I've actually got more tubers than I need, which is just as well, because quite a lot of them are a bit rubbish, so I can discard those, be a little bit picky, and 2 of these would actually be enough in here, but I'm going to set 3, I think, in each of these pots. Down near the bottom again, I will space those more or less evenly. Now if I were planting a properly determinate variety in here, one of the first earlies, then I would do these on 2 tiers. I would put 2 in one orientation down the bottom, and then in the other orientation another pair halfway up. But I'm just going to grow these on one level, should be fine, and I will put 3 in each of these because I've got lots of tubers and I'm not that bothered about the potato size at the end of the day. I'd like quite a lot of them, but they don't have to be big. So that's what I'm going to do for the rest of these pots. Well, that job is done now, and I am greatly relieved, because this is one of those days in the garden where I do struggle a little bit. So I've got that heart failure, and it is quite a lot of effort to move this much compost. And actually, I know a lot of gardeners have many more pots than this, and actually we would also need more of these if potatoes were more of a staple for us, but they're not. We eat far too much pasta and noodles for the potatoes to be a big staple here. So this is definitely plenty for us, and we will do another sowing in the autumn. But I think on balance, growing in the pots works better for us. There were 2 reasons for moving to pots last year. Last year was the first year where we grew all of the potatoes in pots. In previous years we've only grown the first earlies in pots to get our really early crop. The others, we would put in 2 of these main veg beds here, and actually that's quite a lot of work as well. So we then put the polytunnel over 2 of these beds, and I turned another one over to asparagus. So we were starting to lose too much space in those beds. So that's one reason why we moved entirely to pots. And the other is that I think on balance, it is a little less effort to sort out the pots. So I used to, there are other ways to do it, easier ways to cultivate potatoes in a bed, but I used to do it the hard way. I would take out a fairly deep trench, 2 trenches along the length of the beds. I would then plant 6 inches deep in the base of the trench and then gradually ridge them up, I would get great big depth of soil there. Fantastic harvests. But taking out the trenches and then the ridging up, that's all effort. Later on digging them out, it was a huge job, and moving all this compost is also a pretty big job, but now it's done, and it's really convenient because at the other end all we have to do is tip one of these out into a wheelbarrow and pick out the tubers. So I think even though this is a bit of a chore for me with a dodgy ticker, this is still an easier way, I think, to grow the potato. So I'm definitely not going back to the beds. Anyway, this job is finished, and it kind of worked out fairly convenient. Let me show you what I've got. So I've got 5 of the smaller pots, the 15 litre pots. They've got Charlottes in. And then I've got 5 of the 25 litre pots, again with Charlottes. And then I've got the 35 litre pots, so I've got 15 of these in total. I've got 1 with Charlottes, the rest are Wilja and Belle de Fontenay, 7 of each. So it's some years since I've grown Wilja, and that was in the beds. It always did really well for us, that's why I went back to it again this year. The Charlottes will be fine because except for that one large pot, they're all in the smaller pots. And I have put all those tubers down at the bottom. I'll be very interested to see how well that works out for the Wilja. I think it will be all right because it's a semi-determinate, and it's in that borderline area between second early and early main crop, and I think we should get pretty much full pots of potatoes from that. So I'll have to wait until harvest time. Perhaps I've got that wrong and I should have put those on 2 layers, but I don't think so with that variety. I think that one will be fine. And in the smaller pots, the Charlottes will certainly be fine, and they'll probably be okay in that larger one as well. But yeah, it is a little bit tricky with some of those borderline varieties to know what the best way to do that is. So I will find out later in the year, and if need be, change it next time I grow those varieties. But anyway, that is all for this video. Thanks ever so much for watching, and bye for now.